Hello and welcome to Hey Ask Me Stuff, the show where you get to ask me stuff. My name is Ken Coughlin. I am a Christian apologist coming at you from Trinity Lutheran Church and School in Joppa, Maryland. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. A little bit different tonight. We are not live like we normally are. This is a pre-recorded program because after I started scheduling everything, I started advertising the show, went through everything, and somebody sat me down and told me and said, hey, Ken, you realize there's a major storm coming through, right? And everybody's going to be without power, and we're closing everything early. And I did not realize that. So we had to have a real quick shift of focus here. This week's program was supposed to be about, are there any kind of minimal standards for participating in a worship team, for worship music? And we're still going to get to that. I'm hoping to get to that next week. I'll keep you posted on that one. But we had I do want, first of all, we had a guest coming in for that one, so that wasn't possible, was having to reschedule. And, well, again, I had to kind of shift focus to doing something that I can put together really quickly and pre-record. So we have a different topic tonight. I'll tell you what it is momentarily. So actually, no, I won't, because I already have it on the bottom of the screen. I forgot I hadn't turned that on already. So we'll get to that in a minute, but what our topic for tonight's going to be. Thank you very much for joining us. For anyone who, if this is your first time watching the program, let me tell you how it works. This is a show where that is entirely determined, for the most part, today being an exception, by the audience, by the out there, the online audience. You pick a question that you would like to see me and sometimes some others answer live on the show, and we go through those submissions every single week, and we pick a question, and we answer that question. How do you get your question on and considered for a future episode? Well, here's how. You go to this website right here, trinityjoppa.org/askmestuff. On that website, you will find a form that is put together by the wonderful Sarah Garner, who I'm saying because she's actually sitting right over there right now. And you can fill out that form and submit your question. It could be anything about, the Christianity, the Bible, Jesus, your Christian history, atheism, philosophy of religion, world religions, anything that even touches on, the truth of the Christian faith, and put it in on that form, and we look through that every week, and we pick a topic that we are going to be talking about for that week. So that's how you do that. Look forward to it. Let me know what your questions are. Also, quick update about what we've got coming up here in the next few weeks. Like I said, next week, I am hoping to be live back again on the air and be doing that topic about minimum standards for worship music. The following week, while I don't have the topic yet because I'm leaving it up to our very special guest. Oh, I should say next week our guest is going to be Chris Boggs. Our worship leader will be on the show with us, assuming I can get the scheduling worked out for that. The following week, I don't have the topic yet. I do have the guest. It is going to be another pre-recorded one in 2 weeks for necessary reasons, because our guest is going to be a certain pastor from Pennsylvania by the name of Ben Lander. Those of you who have been followers of this channel and subscribers to the channel for some time will remember our old program we had called Trinity Talk Live, which was more of a current events program where Ben and I would go on and go back and forth about the implications to our faith about various different things that were going on in the world. Well, Ben has moved on to bigger and brighter things. He is now pastor of a church up in Pennsylvania, but he's going to be here preaching in the pulpit, not this coming Sunday, but the following Sunday. And he has very generously agreed to stay a little bit afterwards so we can relive old times, And so he's going to come on and he's going to do an episode of Hey Ask Me Stuff. I'll let you know the topic when we get closer. I just talked to him this morning, and I've given him a few ideas, and I'm going to send him some more, then he's going to pick one and let me know what we're going to do. So make sure you don't miss out on that one. Really appreciate it. Also, one last thing of kind of advanced business. When I was on the air here last week, I said at the time we were at 1,500 and I believe 1,944 subscribers. And I had indicated that we had a goal for some time of trying to reach 2,000. And that goal was actually set for us to reach it by June 30th. So we were very well ahead of schedule. And I had indicated last week to you all that I would love to be able to come on the air this week, even though I knew it was kind of ambitious, and to say, congratulations, we've reached the 2,000 goal almost 6 months ahead of time. Well, 2002, folks, as we're sitting here right now recording this. We did it. Thank you all very, very much. We have reached that goal. So I'll let us bask in it for at least a week before I set another one. So we'll come back next week and we'll talk about what we're going to do, because literally we're almost 6 months ahead reaching that goal. So we are thrilled that the Holy Spirit has blessed this ministry. We are thrilled that obviously a lot of you out there seem to be getting something out of it. So still, go ahead, tell your friends, tell your family, because we'd love to see it continue to grow. All right, so our topic for tonight, as you can see running along the bottom of the screen there, is the two types of atheists. To give you a background on where this came from and why I want to talk about it, yesterday, on Monday, January 8th, I posted a YouTube short on the channel, which was responding to something that was said by comedian Ricky Gervais. It was from a time that Ricky Gervais was on with Stephen Colbert, and he was presenting an argument that, I got to be honest, I hear all the time. It is a very common argument that atheists raise, but it's not a good one. It's not a good one. And I had responded to it in the form of this YouTube short, knowing full well what the comment section was going to say. The argument goes like this. Ricky Gervais says, look, you talking to Stephen Colbert, he says, you believe in one God, right? And Stephen Colbert kind of very amusingly comes back and says, well, in three persons, but yes, go ahead. He says, okay, well, he says, there are roughly 3,000 gods to choose from, is what he said. He's actually wrong there. I think the number can be arguably even higher than that, but regardless, he says there's roughly 3,000 gods in the world, the people in the world believe in, to choose from. And he says, you, and this is what atheists said, all Christians, you, Christian, are basically not much different than me, the atheist, because when it comes to 2,999 of those gods, you're an atheist just like me. All I, Mr. Atheist, believe is I just lack belief in one more God than you do, all right? And the intention of this argument is to try to make it seem like Christian, you already know what it's like to be an atheist because you are an atheist. So you really should be an atheist if you follow the same reasoning, or you follow the consistent reasoning that you do for those 2,999 other gods, then you should be an atheist for this one more. And the response that I gave in the YouTube short, I pointed out that for the better part of 2 decades, I was a criminal defense attorney. Actually was a deputy public defender, an assistant public defender, and then a deputy public defender down in Norfolk, Virginia for a few years. And so I dealt with a lot of some of the most serious crimes out there. And I pointed out, so let's say that I was a defense attorney in a murder trial, and I stood up to the jury at the end of the trial, and I said, you know what? The prosecutor and I agree in regard to every other person on the face of the earth. Except for the defendant, we agree on every other person on the face of the earth. We both agree that all those other people didn't commit this crime. I am just asking you, the jury, to take it one more step, to just apply that reasoning to one more person. Am I going to convince anybody by that argument? Of course I'm not, because there's a fundamental difference between all the other people on the face of the earth and my client. And that difference is called evidence, right? There's no evidence that all the other people on the face of the earth committed the crime. Theoretically, the prosecutor, by the time we get to closing argument, has spent the entire trial presenting evidence that my client did it, all right? And so when the atheist, like Ricky Gervais, makes this argument, what they're doing is they're smuggling in an unspoken assumption. And their assumption is that the degree and the amount of evidence for all those other gods, Zeus, Poseidon, Osiris, Ra, name them, that the evidence for them is of the same quantity and quality as the evidence for the Christian God. And that's just plain not true. It's not true. And that's where I had to end the short, because, you can only go 60 seconds on a YouTube short. And so I knew what was going to happen, and I wasn't disappointed, all right? I knew as soon as I ended the short there, I was going to get comments from atheists who said, but there is no evidence for God. There is no. The evidence for your God is just the same as it is for Mithra. Thank you for YouTube world for not disappointing me. And that inspired what I want to talk about today, the two types of atheists, all right? I have been involved in Christian apologetics now for, 26 years? And so I have interacted with a great deal of non-believers from various different stripes. Some are atheists, some are subscribers to other world religions, what have you. But specifically in the atheist camp, what I have discovered over these past 2.5 decades is you can categorize them very easily into two camps, all right? One camp is what I'll call the reasonable and rational atheist. And understand, I'm using that by human terms because we as Christians all know that no one's going to accept the things of God unless the Holy Spirit has softened their heart, right? And so it doesn't matter. There is no such thing as completely and 100% independently reasoning your way to belief in God. We're fallen. We don't have the ability to do that. But I can at least say by human standards, how's that? By human standards, you have one group of atheists that is rational and reasonable. And then you have another group that is, we'll call it emotional, all right? And what I mean by that is not that they're like off on the deep end, they need to be put on Ritalin or anything like that. I just mean that they're driven so strongly by what they want to be true that is the only factor. All right? At that point, there is no reasoning with them. All right? You can't have an intellectual conversation back and forth because they will literally say the moon is made of green cheese if they thought that was going to help them hold on to their belief or lack of belief, as they like to say, lack of belief in God. So you have these two camps, what we'll call the rational camp of atheists and what we'll call the emotional camp of atheists. It is very easy to differentiate between the two. It does not take a huge, long conversation to analyze their approach and their mentality and all that. You can tell it largely by lots of times the first thing they say. If an atheist tells you there is no evidence for God, literally no evidence for God, then they belong in the emotional camp. There's no reasoning with them. There's no point to talking to them. Matter of fact, I will say the only point to engaging with an atheist who tells you there is no evidence for God is if you're in a group setting and there's other people around you that might benefit from hearing what you have to say, because that type of person has thrown rationality and objectivity out the window. I'll defend this in a minute, all right? The other type of atheist, however, will say something along the lines of, I am not persuaded by the evidence that is presented for God. Those are two very different comments, all right? Understand the difference between the two. To say evidence does not exist versus to say, I am not persuaded by the evidence. Let me give you a couple of examples here. So I told you the comment section did not disappoint. And I could have picked even more, but here's a selection of 3 of the comments that I got on that YouTube short. First one says point blank, there is no evidence of God either. They put evidence in quotation marks. Not sure what they meant by that, but okay, whatever. Is there evidence for anything else? I don't know. Anyway, the next one says, do you have any evidence for your God's existence? I rest my case, keep dreaming, peace. Well, maybe you shouldn't rest your case because my answer to your first question would be, yeah. All right. Do you have any evidence for your God's existence? Yes, quite a bit, actually. And this third comment I have in here, there is no quantifiable or demonstrable evidence for the Christian God or any others. Claiming otherwise is pure dishonesty. No, actually, what you just said is pure dishonesty. Let me make this abundantly clear. There is no way, it is impossible for you to be a rational and reasonable person who's committed to intellectual inquiry and make these statements. It's not possible, all right? Why do I say that? Well, first thing is, let me just ask you to think about this on a broad level for a second, and what has to be true for your statement to make any sense and for your statement to be true. The truth of Christianity has been embraced and believed by literally millions and millions and millions of people, some of whom are some of the brightest and most advanced, most intellectual minds of history, all right? Of history, and not just of history, but even of modern times, all right? All these people have been persuaded of the truth of Christianity for thousands of years, about 2,000 years, all right? If we want to go back to monotheism and Jewish monotheism, we could go back even older than that, all right? And yet your belief is that all of those people, those millions and millions of people, including some very, very brilliant people, all thought that even though there was zero evidence for it. None. Zero. Zilch. Nada. Try and take a step back for just a second and think about that. Does that sound rational to you? What's more rational to believe? That these millions and millions of people, some of these very, very intelligent people, who all value evidence and everything else in their lives, believe this one thing with zero evidence to support it, or that maybe you're mistaken and there actually is evidence in support of it. Maybe not evidence you'll find persuasive. That's a different argument. But maybe there actually is evidence for it. If that alone doesn't get you to at least question whether you're the rational one here, then I don't think anything will. I mean, on its face, if you just get that far, it should start to give you some serious questions, all right? The fact of the matter is there is evidence, plenty of evidence for the Christian God. And just to be fair, I've said this many times, I never say and will never say that there is no evidence in support of atheism. Sure there is. I don't think it carries the day, but the number one piece of evidence that I will concede atheists can legitimately put on their side of the argument's ledger is the existence of evil. The problem of evil, absolutely. Do I think the problem of evil counts as evidence against God and therefore for atheism? Sure, I do. I don't think it carries the day, and I think that there are plenty of, rational explanations for the existence of evil. I think when you dive deeper into it, that it actually does not disprove God. I just wrote a whole book on it, actually. But I'm not going to be so naive to say there's no evidence for atheism. Sure there is. I don't think it's persuasive evidence, but there absolutely is evidence. Evidence that I can sit back and see, yeah, if someone's heart isn't softened by the Holy Spirit, for example, I can see why they would find that to be persuasive. Now, on the other side of the ledger, evidence for Christianity, tons of it. Here's just some, all right? The beginning of the universe, the fact that the universe has a beginning, all right, is certainly consistent in evidence that can be used to support the existence of a creator God. The precise values of the laws and constants of the universe, the whole fine-tuning of the universe. The fact that these laws and constants are incredibly precise is not disputable, all right? It's not. That is, in fact, evidence for a creator God, for an intelligence behind the universe. You may not find it persuasive. You may think you can explain away that evidence. That's a different matter from the evidence not existing. The existence of objective moral values and duties. We all, whether we acknowledge it openly or not, we all come back to believing that morality is objective. Well, in order to have a moral law, you have to have a moral lawgiver. You have to have a source for values and duties, all right? The impossibility of an infinite regress of causes. In other words, if you have a causal chain, A caused B, caused C, caused D, so on and so forth, there has to have been a first cause in order for that causal chain to have gotten started in the first place. Last one, I have listed on here is the plethora of evidence for the resurrection, all right? The fact that Jesus did, in fact, die by crucifixion, the fact the tomb was empty, the fact that you have these disciples who had genuine experiences that they at least believed were, in fact, appearances of the resurrected Jesus. They sincerely believed that. The conversion of Paul, the conversion of James. These are all facts that are very well historically attested that the vast majority of historians, Christian or non-Christian alike, believe to be true. This is all evidence for Christianity, all right? So here's the problem. If you are the type of atheist, now I'm not saying you need to find that persuasive, but here's the problem. If you look down that list, let me bring that up again. If you start looking down this list and you start thinking, oh, I can explain that, I can explain that, I can explain that, you've already conceded my point. You've already conceded that you're wrong. The moment you have to start responding to something to explain something away, that shows that it is, in fact, evidence. In court, we have this process, all right, where you will have whether it be the prosecutor or the plaintiff, whoever has the burden of proof, all right, they go first. They present their evidence, all right? And when they present their evidence, and it's not until after they present their evidence that the other party presents evidence. Why? Because if the first party doesn't present any evidence, if the prosecutor in a criminal case, for example, doesn't present any evidence, then I, as the defense attorney, am under no obligation to present anything in response. They have the burden of proof. Once they've presented evidence, then it's my responsibility. Now I do have the responsibility to put forth my case to try to respond to that evidence. The mere fact that they presented evidence doesn't mean they're automatically going to win, but it does mean that now I have a responsibility to respond. And guess what? BA is going to hit my camera. Guess what else?
There's no evidence for that.
Let me get it situated right here. There we go. Guess what else? If once I present my evidence, the prosecutor again gets the turn to present rebuttal evidence. They get to come back and respond to what I presented. If I don't present anything, then they don't present rebuttal evidence because there's nothing to rebut, right? And so the moment you look down this list of purported, what I'm saying is evidence for Christianity, for the Christian God, and you say, I can respond to that, you've already conceded that I'm right and you're wrong. Not in regard to these pieces of evidence supporting the conclusion for God, but in regard to the fact that there is, in fact, evidence for God. If there was no evidence, there would be nothing to respond to. All right. If you have to respond, that means there is evidence. All right. That's what I mean. It is not rational. So if you are the type of atheist that says there is no evidence for God, then understand this. And I want to actually intellectually engage with people. I do. When I hear someone say that, you might as well be holding a sign over your head that says, I'm not a reasonable person. I have not arrived at my conclusions by investigation. I have not rationally evaluated the evidence, and I have no interest in rationally evaluating the evidence. You don't want to think that about yourself, and this is me as an outsider telling you how you come across. You don't have to believe it. A lot of people are going to hear this and going to get furious with me and say, no, I'm not, that's not me at all. Yes, it is. All right. To anyone who actually is involved in this circle, and I mean Christians and non-Christians alike. All right. Anyone who is intellectually involved in these discussion of these issues, that's what you sound like. You sound foolish. You sound foolish when you say things like that. And some people respond to me and say, oh, but you've got, Richard Dawkins isn't foolish, and he says things like that. Yeah, Richard Dawkins is foolish. Understand something. Richard Dawkins may be a brilliant biologist, all right? His field of specialty. He is not a brilliant philosopher. The problem, and this happens with a lot of, especially on the skeptical side of the aisle, is, you'll have people like Stephen Hawking, like Sam Harris, like Richard Dawkins, who may be very brilliant in a particular field. But then they try to step outside that field and engage in essentially what equates to philosophy of religion. And they're abysmally bad at it. Richard Dawkins is abysmally bad at it. Case in point, several years ago, he appeared at something called the Reason Rally. The Reason Rally. Why is it called that? Because skeptics like to say that they have reason on their side, that they are the party of rationality, and Christians are just the reaction. They just believe in blind faith. We'll get to that in a second. All right. They don't use reason. They don't use rationality. We atheists do. And then he got up on the podium and told everybody to mock Christians, to ridicule Christians. Folks, anyone who's even studied philosophy at an undergraduate level knows what an ad hominem fallacy is. All right. He got up there at a rally claiming to be the party of reason and told everybody to not be reasonable. This is why, yes, Richard Dawkins, when it comes to these philosophy, religion issues and questions, is foolish because he does adopt this view that there's no evidence for God. That is a ridiculous view to hold. I'm just going to say it. That is a ridiculous view to hold. All right. And you sound foolish when you say it. Don't say it. You want to be respected. You want people to listen to you, to think you have something valuable to contribute to the conversation. Then start out by saying, I'm not persuaded by the evidence, or I'm not convinced by the evidence. Don't say there is no evidence. The moment you say that, I know there's no reasoning with you. It doesn't matter what evidence I present. You will never be persuaded. Because if you're not even convinced the evidence exists in the first place, and you're living in denial of the existence of the evidence, then you're certainly not going to be persuaded by evidence. All right. I promised you I'd talk about the faith issue here. Here's a couple other comments that came up in the comment section for that YouTube short. This first one I liked is, if you ask a Christian for evidence that God is real, they'll explain what faith is. Happens every time. No, it doesn't. I mean, no, that's just a false statement. You are incorrect. And the only way you can make that statement is, there's only two possibilities I could come up with. Maybe there's a third. The first one is you just haven't talked to many Christians. I mean, there's literally an entire field of theology called apologetics. Have you heard of it? All right. Plenty of people like myself that are out there doing this all the time. So number one is, either you just haven't interacted with very many Christians at all, and you're living in a bubble, just surrounding yourself by a bunch of like-minded folks telling you these kind of things, or you're just misrepresenting what you've been told. You're just misrepresenting. People have told you evidence, and then you're misrepresenting it, saying things like, oh, there is no evidence, even after you've been shown a plethora of it. Another one here. The whole point of faith being the core of religion is that it has no proof. Otherwise, faith wouldn't be such a massive thing. His arguments work perfectly well for what it needs to convey. And this is another example, thank you for proving my point, of so many skeptics don't even take the time to understand the view that they are criticizing. Let me make this abundantly clear, and I've said this on this show and otherwise other places many, many times. That is not what faith means. You, as a non-believer, do not get to tell believers what they mean by faith, any more than I, as a Christian, as a theist, get to tell you what you mean by atheism. That's a conversation for another day. I think some atheists tried to kind of smuggle agnosticism as atheism, but regardless, whatever your belief is what your belief is, and that's what we'll address when we're having conversations. All right? This is not what faith means. Faith does not mean belief in spite of a lack of evidence, or even belief contrary to evidence. Christian faith is faith in. All right? I give the example sometimes of my son when he was a toddler, he was very young. He would stand on the stairs and he would jump into my arms, right? Well, one time in particular, my back was turned and he was standing on the stairs, my back turned. All of a sudden, I just heard, "Daddy!" And I turned around and he's already in midair, right? He's already jumping toward me. Well, I caught him. Did he act out of, when I say that he jumped, though, at the time he jumped, he had faith that I would catch him. He had faith in me. Was it blind faith? No. Why? Because he'd done it a million times before, and I'd always caught him. So while he didn't have 100% guarantee, that much is sure, there's never 100% guarantees, he did have a rational basis for believing that if he jumped, I would catch him based on his plethora of past experience. All right? He had faith in me. This is what Christianity means by faith, folks. It's having faith in Jesus, having faith in God. God does give us enough evidence to support that faith. We never will unless impacted by the Holy Spirit. Again, that's another theological discussion. But he does give us enough evidence for that faith to be rational faith, just like my son had enough evidence that I would catch him before he jumped. All right? But this type of comment, the whole point of faith being the core of religion is that it has no proof. If by proof you mean evidence, that's just incorrect. You're just wrong. Stop saying that. I am now a Christian telling you, you are misrepresenting what the Christian view of faith is. All right? You are wrong. All right? Get over it. That is not true. Now, are there some pockets of Christianity that, fideism, whatever, that would hold to that? Sure, there are some small pockets of it. I will concede that. The overwhelming majority of Christians, both today and historically, have not embraced that definition of faith. It is something that skeptics and atheists want to be true, and so you'll go around and keep telling people it's true. It's a straw man argument. You are committing the straw man fallacy. You are creating a false statement, representation of your opponent's belief that's easier to tear down rather than addressing the true one. So that is an incorrect statement. And this last one concerned me the most out of all the comments. And this is someone who said, I believe in the Christian God out of faith, but I don't know if there's any evidence for him. I would encourage you to explore some of apologetics resources. Heck, we got a lot on this channel, is obviously you can go into. Because that, again, like I just explained, God never says, believe in me with blind faith. All right? Paul regularly engaged in apologetics, regularly resorted to showing evidence for the existence of God. That was his entire approach. You see it throughout the book of Acts and others, okay? Jesus quoted evidence, apologetic. There is, in fact, evidence for God. God never asks you to believe blindly. He gives you enough evidence, again, just like my son, not 100%. You're never going to have any evidence of anything in life that brings you to 100% certainty. He gives you enough to justify taking that leap of faith, like my son took that leap off the stairs. It's enough, I believe, to show that it is far more rational to believe than it is to not believe. That is the more reasonable conclusion, all right? But again, because we are all fallen, and because we're so stubborn, and because we're so emotionally attached to what we want to be true, none of us will ever come to that belief unless the Holy Spirit softens our heart. All right. So that is the two types of atheist. All right, you've got your rational ones, the ones that will start out by telling you that I am not persuaded by the evidence for God, and the more emotional, irrational type that will say there is no evidence for God. I don't know if I've convinced anybody here. Hopefully, if the Christians that are out there I'm talking to, I've at least given you some guidelines so you can understand the different personality types that you will be engaging with out there, and where there's one that's maybe worth having an engagement with, another one that's really just a situation where, for the most part, you just want to wipe the dust off your feet and move on, because they've already told you they're not going to be rational. They've told you from the beginning of the conversation they're not going to be reasonable. They're not going to be properly evaluating anything you present to them, so why bother? Do not cast your pearls among swine, right? Like I said, the one exception to that is if you're an audience amongst other people, and while you're never going to convince this person you're talking to, maybe, was it Greg Kokel, I think, who said that every now and then, something you say might bounce off a hardened heart and land on a softened one, So somebody else who's listening to the conversation may be impacted by what you say. But barring that, it's just not worth it. There's no point to it. And if you are an atheist, hopefully I've been able to persuade you that it is irrational to say there is no evidence for God. Just like I say it's irrational to say there's no evidence for atheism. Sure there is. All right. Say you're not persuaded by it, then that's a point where we can have a discussion. Say it doesn't exist, then you're not being reasonable. You're not being rational. All right. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that is, let's see, let me push the right button here. What's the right button? There's the right button. All right. That is our show for this evening. Thank you very much for joining us. And thank you again to everybody who helped us get to 2,000 subscribers. Again, as a way of reminder, if you want to get a question on a future episode here, go to this website on the screen, trinityjoppa.org/askmestuff. Fill out the form there, submit your question. You might see it on a future episode. Hopefully next week we'll be back with what we were supposed to do this week, talking about whether there are standards for worship music with special guest Chris Boggs. I got to work out the availability, the scheduling, but hopefully we'll be able to do that. And then again, reminder, in 2 weeks, we'll be here with Pastor Ben Lander coming back for a rehash of our old Trinity Talk Live days. All right. So thank you all very much for joining me today. Make sure you tune in again next Tuesday at 6:30. God bless you all. See you then.